What if entrepreneurial economics, the practice of solving problems for others, became our way of life?
This is the Economics for Business podcast. We are here to help all businesses become champions for customers and value, improving lives with preferred and innovative products and services. We offer you the knowledge and tools to make your entrepreneurial journey a successful one. Now, here's your host, Hunter Hastings.
Hi, Hunter Hastings here. We discuss matters of business and economics, tools, processes, ways of managing, understanding people, making choices, and providing products and services. But economics isn't just business, it's life. And today we're going to talk about economic life skills. The core of our economics is value. People always and invariably search for improved well-being in their life. They want greater satisfaction. And when they identify the potential for and ultimately experience new and better satisfactions or a state of greater well-being, that's value. Value is that experience. The skill of an entrepreneur, or each of us when we're producing rather than consuming, is to identify what other people might want or imagine as a future satisfaction, what will make them feel better in the future, what will shift them into a state of greater well-being. As producers, we try to empathize with other people's expectations and then try to bring those expectations to fruition. That's why we call it improving others' lives. They have expectations for a potentially better future. Producers bring that future into existence. This isn't just a business skill, it's a frame of mind. What brings purpose and meaning to life is helping others experience better lives. What is fulfilling is to see others gain new satisfactions. And of course, producers who succeed in bringing this about experience their own gains as well. Pleasure in a job well done for others, pride and a sense of achievement, the glow of purpose, and the mission of contributing to a better world. In business, we develop tools to help us create value for others. We use innovation methods and processes to create the new solution that we can present to others as an improvement on their current experience. We listen to feedback, and we're grateful for the message that tells us we didn't get things quite right, because it enables us to do better. What if we were to run our lives that way, not just our businesses? What if the norm was to dedicate ourselves to solving problems for others? It's an interesting thought experiment that could lead to a better society. Our guest today, Curt Carlson, runs such thought experiments and puts them into practice. He spent a lifetime in value creation and innovation. He was CEO of SRI, the pure innovation company that produced some of the life-improving experiences that many of us love, such as Siri on our iPhones and HDTV technology, through which we enjoy streaming. He founded the consulting company called Practice of Innovation, which created and documented many of the best practices for product and service innovation. He currently teaches value creation and innovation as professor of practice at Northeastern University and distinguished executive in residence at WPI. Curt, welcome back to the Economics for Business podcast.
Good to be with you.
Well, you're a value hero. I think you call it a champion, right? In your terminology, you've visited with us a couple of times before. You shared your NABC process for value creation, which we might talk about a little bit today. It's episode 37, and we'll put a link up to it because that's foundational stuff. Everybody should look at that. But I think we're aligned on the importance of value creation. The purpose of the firm is to generate value for customers. But you're aiming higher than that. You're thinking that value creation is something that goes beyond the firm into the economy and maybe society and maybe even civilization. So tell us about what you're thinking about value creation at the social level. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, so what, in a very fundamental way, what is value creation? It's basically solving problems for others. It's solving problems. It's not just solving problems. A lot of people can solve problems. It's how do you solve problems that have meaning, a positive meaning for others? And of course, you want it to be sustainable. So things come and go, but you basically want to make an impact on a large number of people. So when you define it that way, it's a very generic kind of concept that applies to basically every professional, to everybody in life. solving problems that have meaning for others. That's really, I think, the big idea.
So we sometimes get hung up on the definition of value, and in our language we call it subjective value. It's a feeling, it's an experience that people have. Are you saying we should think differently, that value creation is problem solution? It's solving people's problems.
Well, you just added another concept, which is what is the definition of value? Well, value is only defined by the individual. It's a subjective thing. So people say, well, there are numbers involved. Well, there are numbers involved, but even the numbers mean different things to different people. So, you know, $100 to you might be perceived differently than $100 to somebody in India. I'm sure it would be. Um, it's all subjective. So the definition that we use is the benefits of the offering over the costs, benefits over costs. And they're both subjective qualities. Nobody can decide those for you. You're the only one who decides that. And the tricky part of value creation, is, of course, is understanding what benefits mean to you and what do the costs mean to you. So just as a quick example of costs, when you buy a car, it's not just the price. It's obviously the fuel, the insurance, the maintenance. There's a whole bunch of things that go into the cost. And similarly, the number of things that go into the benefits side of it, the design, the fuel efficiency. There's a whole number of things that you would list that would be unique to you and not the same for me. So value, customer value, end user value is always subjective. So we agree on that. It's completely subjective.
But there is a calculation involved, Curt, right? We struggle with this, but what you've just described is a calculation. If I'm buying that car, I can compare all the different models. I can try and figure out what's more important to me, comfort or fuel mileage or prestige or whatever it might be. I can put a number in, which is the price. I've made an economic calculation, but it's not all numbers. And we say we can't measure value, but people do. People figure it out, right? They run a calculation.
Well, you do, but the equation is in your head. And of course, you don't really think of it as a number. You think of it as an overall subjective feeling of the relative value that you get from the benefits that are delivered and the cost that you're going to have to pay. Now, of course, it's always very tricky because sometimes the costs aren't apparent and there are other issues that come into this. But it's a subjective judgment that you make. And when you buy something or do something, it's a different calculation than anybody else in the world.
And it's a
So,
belief as well, we say, right? It's a belief that my future is going to be a certain way. My future is going to be better if I buy this car
yes.
than if I bought the other one.
Yes, it is kind of a promise, isn't it? That you're offering something to somebody, and you're promising that certain attributes are going to be delivered as part of that promise. And if they're not, of course, you're going to be very disappointed, and you're probably not going to go back to them. And that's another tricky thing. Um, and I would say, just while we're talking about value, people don't appreciate all the dimensions of value. So I mentioned several examples with the car example, but um, people think, why was Steve Jobs so special? Well, he did appreciate that value came in many forms: design, ease of use, how easy it is to find the product, to learn how to use it, the maintenance costs, the subjective feel of it. There are just so many of these different dimensions. And then he was a master at realizing that all these things really did matter to people. And that's why he eventually became, I guess they're the biggest company in the world now, right?
Yeah, and it's a complex calculus. One of the things you've said in the past is, compared to Steve Jobs, most CEOs or CMOs or CTOs or executives or engineers don't understand value and don't understand value creation. And so if we can help them with that, we can improve performance. So
Yeah.
tell us your experience, and why is it that people don't understand value creation?
Well, first off, you have to appreciate the value from these different dimensions we're talking about. Finding the product, understanding it, acquiring it, learning how to use it, how to install it, all these things. Um, you have to really think about that and understand the value of them. And most people don't realize the value from just convenience. Convenience actually has a lot of value to people. And we're seeing that with Amazon and other companies now that are taking more advantage of that. Steve Jobs inherently understood that. He also understood something that I think very few people understand, that mistakes are really damaging. Now, he didn't know about the science of that when he was doing his major work, but Kahneman and Tversky with behavioral science pointed out that a mistake is several times worse than a plus. So, for example, if I give you $1, you'll feel so much good. If I take $1 away from you, they say you'll feel roughly 2.5 times or 2.3 times worse. So mistakes really do matter. And as we know, Steve Jobs was maniacal about every little glitch that could come in the package. You open up the package, you have to be able to take the product out and use it immediately. There's no barriers. Any little barrier he considered to be a big mistake. Most people don't appreciate that. Um, and of course, the good ones do. By the way, this is not a new idea. He wasn't the only one. Morita-san from Sony back in the 1950s completely understood this too. And of course, he created one of the great companies in the world and put a lot of companies in America out of business because he understood convenience and perfection the way Steve Jobs did.
Yeah, and we like that format that you just introduced, the idea of removal of barriers. If you can think
Yep.
empathetically about the customer and what are the barriers that they face to realizing value, to convenience, to ease of use, then that's a good way to run the process, right?
Well, you just, yeah. So mental models are really important here. You know, the idea that you have to put yourself, use the word empathy too. So putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And empathy is kind of a complicated word. But if you think about it, is we all have mental models for the way we want the world to work. One mental model that Steve Jobs understood was people want to do things that are easy to make happen. They don't want to fiddle around with a package and open up software and have to read 20 pages of a document to figure out what to do. So Steve Jobs had that mental model that he thought everybody else in the world shared with him. So he matched up his mental models with theirs. We call that empathy sometimes, but the truth is it was a very conscious thing on his part. He had the right mental models. And these are things that people can develop. You can train people to think, you might call it empathetically, but really it's about how do you identify other people's mental models and how do you leverage them to deliver more value for them? And one mental model for sure is barriers are bad things. So get rid of the barriers.
Yeah.
But most people don't do that, as we know.
You have a technique for helping your innovation teams to identify the customer's mental model?
Yes, for sure. The biggest mistake, let's start off with the biggest mistake people make is thinking that a problem is a need to be solved. A problem is an issue where maybe there's something you can do, but then you have to find out what specific need within that space can you do something about, and of course, can you put the resources together to address it? So a problem is not a need, and um, I often do the simple example of the slow elevator. It's called the slow elevator. It's kind of a made up example, but it illustrates the point. So, Hunter, you're now the manager of a big office building, 40 stories high. You've got some of the most prestigious clients in the world, and they're all coming to you and saying the elevators are too slow, and there's a new building next door, and if you don't fix it, we're gonna move out of your building and go somewhere else. So then I would ask you, Hunter, what are you going to do about your slow elevator? Now, you're a great manager. Um, I won't put you on the spot here with this, but but typically people will say, well, you know, if they're like you, they're a really thoughtful scientist manager. You'll say, well, first I got to do is check the elevator, make sure it's working properly. Okay. Well, it turns out the elevator is working properly. And you think, well, how about new algorithms? Well, no, that's not going to do it either. They're perfect. Um, what else can I do? Well, I could build new elevators. Okay, you can build new elevators, but that's going to cost you millions of dollars. Okay. That's when people take a problem and look at it from the point of view of the elevator, as opposed to looking at it from the point of view of the end user. What's the problem with the end user, not the elevator? The problem with the end user, we're back to subjective value again here, Hunter.
Yeah.
The problem with the end user is they're impatient, they're annoyed, they're bored, they want to get on with things that are valuable to them. So then the question is, well, what can you do to alleviate their annoyance? Well, in airports, we put up TV screens to entertain them. That's one thing you could do. And that is done in some places. You could serve them coffee there. There's a bunch of things you could do that would occupy them productively while they're waiting for the elevator. One of the solutions that's often done is just putting up a mirror. So when people come in, they basically entertain themselves by checking their tie, making sure their hair is combed, the kind of things they might do when they get on the 40th floor before they go into the meeting. So the difference here is profound. In one case, you're thinking about hiring contractors and engineers to build you a new elevator. In the other case, you're going down to the local store and buying a $100 mirror and putting it on the wall. So that kind of thinking is what's missing almost all the time. So we have examples like that. We have another, and by the way, all these techniques are called reframing. You're trying to look at it from a different point of view. So instead of looking at it from the point of view of the elevator, we're now looking at it from the point of view of the end user. And that's a theme. You can imagine that's a theme because, again, going back to the first point we made, it's only the end user with their subjective evaluation of what we're doing that matters. They're the only ones who decide. We don't decide. We can just give offerings to them with a promise, but we can't really address it unless they're happy with the answer. So we have to reframe it and basically understand their mental models and make sure our mental models don't get in the way. So in this case, the mental model that's getting in the way is we're focusing on the elevator and not our end users.
Yeah.
So
No,
we have a family of techniques like that. In fact,
okay.
our whole methodology is based on unrelenting reframing to solve this problem that I suffer from this problem. Everybody I know suffers from this problem. We discover a problem and we jump to a solution and it's always wrong. It's almost always it's almost the iron rule of value creation, which is we all want to jump to our favorite solution and it's almost always a mistake.
Yeah. The place my mind went to in your example, Curt, was I'd be mad at the elevator as a user because I thought it was wasting my time, or the elevator owner was wasting my time. And your solution makes me feel, well, it's less of a waste of time if I get
So
to do something.
that's exactly right. So the mental model that the solution of that I described is realizing that you have a mental model that's probably feeling like you're wasting your time. That's your mental model. And so I have to somehow understand that. In this case, it's not so hard to understand. In real cases, it's, teasing out what your mental models are is a really difficult thing because you probably don't even know them yourself. Customers rarely know what's possible, and they're rarely aware of their mental models. They're so internalized. There's so much about who they are. They never think about them. It's just the way they behave. So part of value creation is teasing out those mental models that your customers have, and also teasing out your own mental models because equally you don't really know all of them very well yourself because you take them for granted. So this back and forth between the value creator and the end user, the customer, is this back and forth, back and forth. That's where the iteration comes, where it's creating value on both sides of the equation. You're creating value for the end user, but you're also in a way creating value for yourself by helping to understand your mental models and how you can do a better job.
And then in your larger construct, Curt, you put together the three terms, value creation and innovation, or two terms,
Yes,
value
yes.
creation, innovation, VC&I. You
Yes.
talk about it as a unity.
Yes.
What happens when you add the concept of innovation? How have I advanced beyond the framing that you just talked about?
Well, let's just mention a few definitions because that's one of the things we find is missing. So I've done workshops with thousands of professionals, as you can imagine, over my career all over the world, leading universities, top 20, top 10 companies. And so we start off asking them some definitions. For example, what's the definition for innovation? So that is their job after all. They're supposed to be creating value for others, right? So what's the definition for that? Well, how many of those managers and executives have actually given a complete answer to that? Only a few. Only a few. And they all say, well, it's something new, it's something better, it's something blah, blah, blah. So they're not exactly wrong. But what they forget is that it has to have a sustainability model. It has to have a business model. Invention is where you come up with something new, but unless people use it, it's not an innovation. It's got to both be new and novel, solve a real problem, but it also has to have a sustainability model. And that's the big difference between invention and innovation. And it's curious to me, it's again back to this theme of mental models. If you don't have the mental model as a manager that it's not just solving the problem, it's solving the problem in a sustainable way, then obviously it's going to slow you down. So that's one. We mentioned another core definition, the definition for customer value, which we defined as benefits over costs. Again, it's not just one or the other. You've got to do both of those. And again, that's a mental model that helps you be more efficient and effective. Value creation is the process of identifying critical and important unmet end user or customer need, market needs, societal need, with a solution that's better than any alternative and addresses the needs of all the stakeholders. So that's kind of a little more complicated, but basically you have to identify an important unmet need. That's number one, that matters to people. You got to come up with a solution that is better than any alternative, or else why are you doing it? And you have to address the needs of your other stakeholders. So what are the stakeholders? Well, you start with the end user, of course, but then you have your enterprise, you have your colleagues, you have your suppliers, you have society. And if you violate any of those principles, you're not going to be successful. So when you take that and if you can deliver that into the marketplace with a viable business model or sustainability model, it doesn't have to be financial to be sustainable. You can have volunteers, for example, like with Wikipedia, make a sustainable innovation. But it has to have some kind of sustainability model or it's not innovation. Now, you talk a lot about entrepreneurs. So that's the other part of this equation, of course. Entrepreneurs are those really rare people. The kind of entrepreneurs I'm thinking about here are people who really do significant things. So in a way, everybody can be kind of an entrepreneur. But I'm going to just say the ones who can take and create major innovations. They're incredibly rare. They may be like 1 out of 1,000, 1 out of 10,000 people. It's a very rare thing. And those are people who assemble the resources and assume the risk of taking a new potential innovation into the marketplace. So we start by defining these terms because if we don't basically understand these things, we're going to use them and our mental models are going to be so different that when you say value proposition, you're thinking one thing, I'm thinking something else. And we have to, if we're going to work productively, Hunter, we need to be able to agree that there are at least 4 questions that need to be answered with a value proposition, which we can go into. That's the NABC part of it. But if you don't answer those 4 questions, we probably still don't know what we're doing.
A quick note. Economics for Business is a uniquely Austrian platform to help entrepreneurs build value-generating businesses at every stage of the entrepreneurial journey. We've now launched online with an outstanding database of entrepreneurial knowledge, tools to solve specific business problems, and a community exchange to share information and experiences. Check it out at econ4business.com. That's ECON, 4, business.com. Explore and let us know what works best for you in the feedback section. Now, back to our conversation.
Yeah, and you've said several times, so it's worth reiterating, getting those 4 questions right is really, 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 really hard and requires a lot of work and iteration and repeat and so on, right? It's not, you can't snap it off.
Yeah, so let me just mention what those four questions are. So we start out with the four most basic questions, I think, for any problem-solving activity that's supposed to have meaning for others. So what's the unmet need? The need, that makes sense. We talked about that. That's really hard to identify. We talked about reframing to help identify that. The second thing is, what's your approach for the offering and the business model? Remember, we need both of those, or else it's not an innovation. We need an offering and a business model. What's the approach? What are the benefits per cost? That's the value. We've defined that now of the offering. And how does that compare with the competition or the alternatives? So just four questions: the need, the approach, benefits per cost, and the competition. And the thing about those four questions is you want to keep it basic in the beginning because what we're doing is really hard. And in the beginning, all those things are changing all the time. So the need, as you're trying to figure it out, the need is the thing that's probably changing the most. And every time you change the need, the other three probably change too. So they all interact with each other. So it's a little complex adaptive system where you're trying to get the solution to emerge. And you don't want to have 12 variables. You want to have the minimum fundamental variables to focus on to get right to begin with. So they all interact with each other. So you want to get them straight. And if you do get them straight, you're probably going in a good direction. The probability that you're going to have success goes up enormously. And what we see, Hunter, if we were doing a workshop with a big company right now, we would ask these people, brilliant people, educated at the best schools in the world, and they've been working on these things for, in some cases, years. And we asked them to answer just these four questions. Just what's the need, the unmet need, why is it important? What's your approach for the offering, the business model? What's the benefits per cost? And tell us who the competition is and the alternatives. So this will be surprising, and it always sounds almost impossible. Out of thousands of teams, Hunter, how many have been able to answer succinctly, completely, and quantitatively those four questions?
The first time out, you mean? The first time they look at it?
First time we asked them.
I suspect you're going to tell me none.
Exactly right. None.
Wow.
And what we discover is in all of our workshops that people have to pivot. That means they have to change their direction because they realize that just by asking that, again, back to simple mental models that are fundamental. By putting that mental model on the table, we get them to think about their project in a new and a more complete way. And almost always there's a change in direction. I would tell you, though, in most of the workshops we're in, if I were the CEO, I would cancel about 75% of the projects because they fundamentally are not capable of answering those four questions. So what typically happens is people want to jump from their problem to an approach. They then want to build a big team. They then want to build it, and they haven't figured out yet what to do. They haven't figured out the risks. They haven't mitigated the risks. They haven't done a lot of the work that you should do before you start spending a lot of money. That's always a mistake. People do a lot, by the way. One of the things I know you study is complexity analysis too. So the thing about value creation, it's a complex activity. It's not a complicated one. A complicated one is like building a bridge. So, if you don't break the laws of physics, you're probably going to have a pretty good bridge. But what we do with value creation and innovation is complex. When you start, you can't guarantee that you'll have an answer because lots of things can go wrong. You can have a downturn in the economy, the competition can come along, your team can get sick, lots of things can go wrong, and it will stop you. So it's complex. And so what you want to do is use the fundamental principles of complexity analysis. And the example I just gave you with NABC is one of the most important rules is start with the fundamentals at first. Don't put a lot of variables on the table. And we see that mistake all the time. I can't tell you how many teams we see that use the business model canvas to start their innovations with 40 questions. It's just impossible. They're so confused when we go into workshops. It's a terrible mistake to use that as a starting point. It's a checklist. it's something you check, at various points, but you don't use that as the foundation for how you start innovation. Another recent one, so these are not bad ideas; they're just misused, right? Another one is minimum viable product. Have you ever heard of that one, Hunter?
Yes, I've heard of it.
Well, so the idea is, you build a minimum viable. So it sounds like a bad product to start off with, minimum viable product. But anyway, but that's not the misuse we see. The problem we see with that is it encourages people who, again, want to immediately build their brilliant idea. That's such a temptation, especially for engineers. They want to build it. They want, as soon as they get their idea, they want to build it, assemble their big team, and have people love it.
Yeah, it's the A, right?
So if you think about this from complexity analysis, that's not the way you think. What you think about is, what's the minimum viable experiment that I can do to take the risk of? Not the minimum viable product. Until I've mitigated the risks, it doesn't make sense to make anything. And that one idea, just removing, one, it's not a bad mental model, it's just misplaced. The mental model has to be put into a context as well, right? Taking that one mental model that gets misused. Well, I just did a workshop with a company, and they admitted that just the idea of minimum viable experiment would have saved them $40 million on just one project.
Yeah.
So,
So Curt, there's such a lot to learn from you in this process, but where I wanted to go today was a level that you mentioned earlier. You talked about society as one of the stakeholders, and I believe that you think that VC&I, value creation and innovation, can be a life skill. It'd be something we teach
yes.
to everybody, kids in school and
Yep.
and executives even who aren't in the innovation part of business, and everybody. So elevate us to that level. How do you see it as a societal variable here?
Well, let me ask you a few questions first, Hunter.
Mhm.
Do you solve problems on a regular basis that have meaning for others?
I try to. I know I do for my wife all the time.
Exactly right? You do. And for lots of other people, and I know you do. That's that's the way you're wired. You're constantly working to solve problems that have meaning for others in your private life as well as in your professional life. And I think everybody does that. I mean, if they're a good person, everyone is trying to do that. They're trying to efficiently solve problems that have meaning for others. Of course, they're doing it for their own benefit too, but nevertheless, they're doing that all the time. So this idea of value creation in innovation, adding the innovation part into it, as you can see, is the idea of you want it to be sustainable. It's not just you want to solve the problem, but then you want to figure out how do you make it sustainable and get it in the hands of your end users. So the way it goes is value creation leads to innovation, which can then lead to entrepreneurship. But you can't jump to the entrepreneurship before you've done the value creation and then figured out how to turn it into an innovation. So there's a sequence. And again, this is complexity analysis. You want to start at the right point when you're creating new innovations for people that serve others. So the first point I would make about that great point, Hunter, is that it's something that we all do all the time. Everybody, it's a profoundly human attribute. It's one of the most profound human attributes we have that distinguishes us as humans. We're constantly trying to solve problems for others. Now, there's some animals where people would say they have this behavior, do this as well, but no, um, humans do this just nonstop all day long. Now, of course, it scales. So oftentimes we're solving problems for one other person, like you for your wife and she for you. Sometimes you might be doing it for a group that you work with. So it scales from one person up to, with things like the internet, and we're basically talking about most of the people on the planet. So there's a continuum here, but it's really a difference of scale. It's not a difference of intent. And what people don't think about often is that, and you see this in educational and universities and schools, they teach people how to solve problems, but that's not the life skill. The life skill is the mental model that you're solving problems that have meaning for others. That is the life transforming mental model that can change a career in a really positive way. We're not just solving problems, we're solving problems that have meaning for others.
Yeah, the other part that I always think of you when I try to do this is I ask myself, what is the other's mental model? What is my wife's mental model? What is my group's
Yes,
mental model? What is this person I'm trying to influence? What is their mental model?
yes.
It's a hard thing to get skilled at, but it's a very telling process if you start there.
It is. It's again, we gave the example of the number one problem we have is we fall in love with our own ideas because that's our mental model. And then how do we how do we transform that from our brilliant idea into doing something that really will impact others? And when I think of entrepreneurs, I think of entrepreneurs as people who impact a lot of people. So that's again a unique kind of skill to be able to do the scaling part of it. But yes, understanding the mental models of other people is the big challenge. And the way we've found to help people is through this concept of reframing. So, for example, if you were in one of our workshops, we would have you present the value proposition for what you're working on. So, we would describe to you NABC, what's the need, your approach, the benefits, the cost, the competition. We'd ask you, and we give you 2 minutes to present that, not a long time. And then we'd ask your colleagues at random in the audience, help Hunter make it better. So what was good? Don't forget that. That was brilliant, Hunter. That part was brilliant. Don't forget that. What could be improved? All positive, no negatives. It's got to be positive. Then eyes of the end user or customer. No surprise that I said that, right? After the first part of our discussion. And what are the eyes of the investor or the funder or the enterprise? So you've got more than one stakeholder. You've got these other stakeholders. So you need to look at what you're proposing from these different points of view. Those are all ways to help you reframe what you're doing by having people with different perspectives, with different skills, with different mental models, take their mental models and help you see through them what you're trying to do. And it turns out that is really, really powerful. It makes a huge difference. Not the first time you would present, but if you came back and you presented multiple times, you would discover, I think, inevitably that what you came in with and what you went out of after we did 8 or 10 of these would be profoundly different. So we help you do that. We all need help to do that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You mentioned you could teach this to kids in K through 12.
Yeah.
How would you do that as opposed to teaching business executives?
Well, it's all pretty much the same, actually. You want to put people in teams, working on problems, and then you make the distinction between we're not just going to solve a problem, we're going to solve a problem that has meaning for others. And there are schools that do this. There's a school I'm in California, near Stanford University, and there's a girls' middle school here that has a program where the young girls have to form a company and they have to deliver a product and they have to sell it into their marketplace. So you can embed these kind of ideas in different levels of the curriculum. Because again, kids are always solving problems. You just add a slight twist to them by adding a few of these mental models. So NABC, if you just know NABC, it's going to help you be much more effective. So that's happening. Australia has a program. I think it's even younger. I think it's middle school. Below middle school kids who have a program like that. So again, it doesn't have to be that complicated to do this.
Yeah, and then you got to teach the teachers, Curt. You got to
Well, that's the hard
teachers to
part.
do this. Yeah.
So here's the hard part of this. Value creation is we've been discussing that it's hard to reframe the problems in the right way and to put all these pieces together. It really is hard. You think about someone like Musk and you say, well, look what he's done. Well, you forget that it was 10 years before Tesla really looked like it was going to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
SpaceX, 10 years. My team created the US standard as part of the team for high definition television. That was 10 years trying to put the pieces together. And you forget that these things, if they're significant, they're really hard to put together. And teaching these skills to others can't be done from a workshop or a lecture or a Zoom meeting. It's just not possible. It's experiential. You have to do it and do it and do it and do it. I analogize it. I used to be a professional violinist. I played when I was 15. I was a member of the Rhode Island Philharmonic, and music has always been my metaphor for what it takes. You know, the old joke of how do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Mm-hmm.
Practice, practice, practice. Well, why would we think that value creation and innovation is any easier than becoming a professional musician? It's not. So you got to practice it over and over and over and over again. So at SRI, when I was the CEO there, we could do that because the first thing when people came in, we would put them through a 3-day workshop, working in their teams, and so there'd be we call them value creation forums. A value creation forum is where 3 to 6 teams come together with 3 to 5 members, and they all present their value propositions, very short ones, no more than 5 minutes, and they get feedback the way I described. So that's what we did all the time. And after a couple of years, it was amazing what we were doing. Well, we went from failing for 20 years to growing 3.5 times and creating innovations like Siri and high definition television with the same people that have been failing for 20 years, just by giving them these mental models, but doing it in a way where it's experiential, where they can actually learn it by doing it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Here's a puzzle to me, Hunter. So, how many senior managers and CEOs have I talked to in my career? Is innovation important to you? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the most important things we do. Why don't, since you agree that it's a fundamental attribute of all your professional staff, why don't you, when you hire someone, why don't you put them through a workshop to help them understand what value creation and innovation means in your company? Why don't you do that? SRI was the only company that ever did that. That was the first thing we did. Got people working together. They got to understand our values, how we work together, but then it never stopped. And after 3 or 4 years, our people were just amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
They learned these skills. Yeah.
Yeah,
By
it
the
is
way,
amazing.
we never hired a PhD who knew how to do this from any school. It's not taught. It's not taught.
So that takes me to another place. I think you mentioned, Curt, that at one of the universities where you teach,
Yes.
you're negotiating with the deans to teach this value creation, innovation, life skill across disciplines, whether people are in humanities or engineering or
Yes.
business or wherever they might be. Do you always teach that in a business context, or can you take it out of a business context and teach it in a more general sense?
Well, yes. So again, this is a life skill that applies to basically everything you do in life. If there's a end user or a customer or a partner or on the other side of the equation, right? So this is what every professional should be doing this. But as I argued, basically it's the fundamental thing that every person does in their life. So absolutely. So the difference with obviously with certain things like business issues is they're going to have a business model that's financial, that you have to make a profit. But a lot of things in life don't necessarily have a sustainability model that's based on making a profit. So, for example, we did a lot of work on teaching first-year algebra in school. So the issue there was inserting it into the curriculum. It was not that we needed to come up with a new business model. They had their business model. We just had to convince them that we had a better way to teach algebra. So we do all those kinds of things. So absolutely. And so when we're working with people who want to work on problems like that, we ask of them to have a sustainability model. So not a business model, but a sustainability model. And because again, it doesn't make sense to work on things unless people use your idea in a sustainable way. And And when you explain that to people, they understand why, because they don't want to waste their time. They want to be successful. They want to make an impact on society. And that means you solve a problem that matters. Again, that sticks around because it's sustainable.
Yeah. And I think your um, benefits greater than cost calculus is part of that. We think of profit in the sense of not just financial profit, money profit, but psychic profit, that people can profit in terms of emotion, feeling better, being more confident, those kinds of things. If you can accumulate those as benefits for other people at a lower cost than how they perceive the benefits, then you've achieved something in life. So you can use the B over C calculation in any format, not just business.
Absolutely. And that is such an important point. So when I was CEO of SRI, we had basic researchers, and that I didn't mention uh, words like entrepreneurship, management, leadership, culture change. I never mentioned those words. The thing I always started off with was achievement, making a difference that mattered. Because that's what motivated the kind of people. We had 2,500 people. That's what motivated them. They wanted to make a positive contribution to society. And by the way, if they did that, of course, we could also make money from that. But it was the motivation was exactly what you said. And it's amazing to me how few people realize that. If you excuse me, I want to go back to the schools that we're working with. So you
Yeah, please.
mentioned I work with a number of universities right now. On Northeastern, we're developing an online platform to teach this material. I work with ASU, Michigan, and other folks. But at WPI, we're doing something very, very different, which I think could be transformative. WPI pioneered project-based education back almost 50 years ago. That was a huge innovation in education. And as you know, now basically every university does some kind of capstone or some kind of projects where they put the teams together. And for obvious reasons, when they go out in the world, they're going to work in teams and they're going to be asked to work together to solve a problem. Okay, so that's now become the norm around the world, basically. And WPI pioneered that. Well, so we've been working there with a core of great people to develop the idea that's not enough anymore. The goal is not to solve projects, is to solve projects that matter, projects that matter to others. And it's that switch that you and I have been talking about between projects and solving a problem to reframing it in a way that it solves a need that others have, projects that matter to others. That is the big change. In WPI, because it's a profoundly project based school, we can embed the ideas of value creation and innovation across the curriculum. And our goal, we're not there yet, but our goal is to eventually have every student graduate from WPI who will have a certificate in the mastery of value creation and innovation. And I can almost promise you those will be very, very different students because, we have some of them already. We've been doing this for years to build this up at WPI. But they are very different. They think about the world in a much more constructive, healthy, positive way. And and one of the things you and I have talked about is how scary some of this can seem in the beginning. Well, it is scary if you don't know what to do. If all of a sudden I told you to stand up and play the violin at Carnegie Hall, if you were, you'd be horrified at the thought of doing that. But if you've done the homework and you know what you're doing, you can stand up there and perform. Well, the same thing is true with value creation and innovation. So we focus on value creation and innovation because they're the precursors to entrepreneurship. You can't really do entrepreneurship in the university. That's not the primary goal. Now, of course, these people are going to be then ready to become entrepreneurs, right? Again, they're going to know the fundamental starting points. If you create value and you can turn it into an innovation, then if you have the capabilities, you too can become a real entrepreneur. That's what we're trying to do. I think
Yeah,
if we can, and we're involving other universities, as I said, I think if making this happen would be one of the most certainly significant things I've ever done in my career.
absolutely. No, I love it. It's civilizational is the word
Well,
that
it
I use.
is. It is. It's. I think of it as a gift. Well, it's in terms of the emotional part of this. The reason I teach now is I don't have to teach. I've been, I ran a company for all those years. The reason I teach is it's a gift. When you give people these skills, it is a life skill gift. The people who know how to do this were sought out by others because they know how to solve these problems. They attract the best people, and it only gets better over the career. This only gets better once you have the foundation to begin to think the way we're describing.
Yeah.
It's a life skill.
So you'll have to help us with our vocabulary, Curt. We align behind everything you said. We call it the entrepreneurial society, and we use the word entrepreneurship not as the rare achiever like a Jobs or a Musk, but the whole approach that you talked about, or the whole value creation set of principles, that if I'm always thinking about how to solve problems for other people, problems that are important to them, I'm trying to think of their mental model, that would be an entrepreneurial society that'd be a lot different than it is today. We'd have different sense of meaning and purpose in our lives, and we'd educate our kids differently, as you said. So we'll have to find another word for entrepreneurial society, but that's the way we model it.
Well, it's obviously a great word, and it was curious to people that here I am in Silicon Valley, right? I mean, next to Stanford, the heart of in Sand Hill Road, where the venture capitalists are, and I'm not using that word. Well, it comes with some baggage, as you know, as well, right? I mean, Steve Jobs wasn't exactly the best person in the world, so it comes with a lot of baggage, and it tends to make people into mavericks. And the principle we adhere to is if we create the value and we create the innovations, then it opens up the opportunity for entrepreneurship. So which one comes first? But obviously, that's where we were going, is to help people who had the attributes to be entrepreneurs at the small scale or the big scale. So that's where we're going. But it came with baggage, and the order tended to get people to think about things in not quite the right way. So that's the challenge you're going to have. You have to somehow solve that problem. The word you use, which is a great word, comes with some baggage.
Yep.
We have this problem with the university professors because they think a lot of these ideas don't apply to them. So obviously, I don't use the word entrepreneur in universities because that would be really a red flag and they'd throw me out of the room. But they all want to be value created. They all want to do things that, again, that's back to achievement and motivation. They want to solve big, important problems. They want to make a contribution. They want to be better. They want to master how you put together interdisciplinary programs. So we start there. That's why it's value creation and innovation, and not. We obviously teach also entrepreneurship, but we're trying to solve this problem, the starting problem of creating value, which is the life skill.
Good. Okay, Curt, we'll call it the Value Creation Society. We'll try and find a new word. And now you've convinced me that the other's mental model is that entrepreneurship means orneriness and maverickness and so on. So you could understand that.
Not in my mind, but too often, unfortunately. Too often, unfortunately, for both of us. Otherwise, we both use it more generally. Yeah.
Good. Well, Curt, thank you so much for today. We believe in what you believe in, which is that value creation and innovation of skill sets that we should inject at every level, have everybody thinking about it. And the way you think about it is great leadership for the rest of us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Obviously, you're an exemplar of these things as well. And I've learned an enormous amount from you and the work you're doing. So thank you for being a champion. Use that word champion for value creation, innovation, and entrepreneurship.
Economics for Business is a production of the Mises Institute. To explore more content like this, visit econ4business.com. And for more from Hunter Hastings, visit hunterhastings.com.